Mark.
We are treated as impostors, and yet we are true. As unknown, and yet are well known. As dying and see, we are alive. As punished and not killed. As sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. As poor, yet making many rich. As having nothing but and yet possessing everything. Can we who feel as though we are imposters in this era of collapse and realignment know who we truly are? Unknown or unrecognized by nation states, our workplaces, our families and communities, our peers. Can we accept that we are known? Can we know each other? Can we find sleep while our inevitable death runs through our mind at night and wake up and feel alive in a world which denies our right to live as we're created? We who have endured so much loss and grief and alienation, who have survived through these years and through generations, how can we rejoice when so many others still cannot? We who are denied generations of stolen wealth, who exist as numbers, we who in our immiseration with the many enrich the few, are we truly poor? We who are supposedly nothing, why do we give from that nothingness? Who find a way out of no way, how do we suddenly possess everything? We who desire the genuine love and power of God, can we accept that we are impostors and sinners only in the world that is washing away? That now is the time of salvation. What I find refreshing in Paul's second letter to the Corinthians is his insistence on the reality of salvation in the crucified Christ. In preceding and following passages, Paul affirms the salvation of the flesh and the birth of a new body, but not just anybody, the body of a person who is crucified, one who has died in one of the most shameful ways of its time and context. This personhood, according to the worldview of the Roman Empire, stripped away, all dignity robbed from him, his name added to the ash heap of all of those who have been intentionally obscured, who have died in the minds of their friends and families and communities long before they drew their last breath. A social death, a spiritual death, a death robbed of all meaning and purpose and legacy. His life reduced to that of a criminal, unredeemable in the eyes of the law, awarding post for all who would follow him into a death world of non-existence and non-humanity. There is nothing else possible but empire and subjugation. The only immortality, the legacy of those born into power and who claim it with violence and deceit. And there's supposedly only two options. Uphold and worship those who have taken false authority in their lands that are not their own, who claim to be righteous in their intent, and can hold your unrighteousness against you, or two, join that foundational reality of empire, be reduced to mere empirical matter, a barbarian, a savage, a slave, to nothingness, to that nothingness in a binary of thought from which I, holy and sinless, can claim to be something and someone. No. Paul finds salvation in that nothingness from which we hold the universe was created in Genesis, following Christ into solidarity with the nobodies and the nothings. Paul finds a new body in Christ, Christ who was without sin, who was made by God to be sin, to descend into hell, to conquer death, to reconcile the world to God through his death and resurrection. We who, through grace, are blessed to feel like imposters in the world that is perishing. Can we accept that the day of salvation is here? So much of this acceptance, I think, like how Paul in our lesson connects being an imposter with truth, death with life, sorrow and rejoicing, poverty and wealth, relies on accepting and knowing ourselves as sinners. I've slowly come to accept my own sinfulness as the most beautiful part of myself. Or at least the part of myself, the part of me which feels utterly wretched, incomplete and dysphoric, overwhelmed with guilt, beholden with shame, behind what is expected of me, and fully compromised by sin, is also seemingly and surprisingly the part of me which is most aware of the beautiful, what is good, and what is holy. Alone, this feels unbearable. My life is like that of a lead pencil drawing that which I am not, but so desperately desire. The lead snapping under the weight of my expectations and desires, the weight of what I imagine goodness to be, or what I am told goodness is causing my pencil to keep pushing and punching through the paper endlessly, neurotically, just clicking my lead pencil and refilling the lead into my pencil of a life, just trying to get this right. When we confess our sins to God and one another, it's as if we're holding up that drawing and innocently saying, I made this for you. In God's love and grace, I imagine God, our parent and caretaker, smiling and saying, it is so wonderfully made. Now, sin is a slippery and troublesome topic and word, and perhaps because I grew up in a fire and brimstone, repent lest ye burn context, it has always carried a heaviness with the highest of stakes, namely the fears of not belonging in the life of a community in all of my fullness, and by extension, not belonging in that life which persists beyond and conquers death. Even speaking this, I feel a sense of dread in my chest, in my arms, in the back of my knees right now. And in my life of sin, what has been helpful for me is to stay there. In that sensation where it feels like the weight of the solar system is bearing down on a pinpoint, pointing to this place at the intersection of my innermost inner dialogue, and also my most enfleshed sense of my being. And at that intersection, it feels like it's pinpointing in to my soul. And in that pinpoint, it feels like I am entirely worthy, not worthy, of belonging. There where my pencil lead is snapping. In those moments where I am unworthy of belonging, I can trace without a doubt where I do belong, or at least where I feel I've been excluded from. In my sinfulness, I can readily define most distinctively what I am supposedly not. Now, my relationship with this overwhelming goodness has changed so lovingly throughout the years of coming into the body of Christ, though I still often feel that pinpoint of wretchedness in my body arrested by shame and guilt. It's as if my breathing becomes a mere mechanical process. It's as if my stomach dries up with revulsion and disgust. My eyes get lost in reflective surfaces. My heart is somehow both aimless and certain. My skin, this sharp boundary between me and everyone and everything else. In this impression of sin upon my body, I have learned to feel God's grace, to feel that grace calling me to the fullness of what I already love entirely, what I feel will save me. Lent, fasting, and I would argue asceticism are less about depriving ourselves of what we desire and more about putting down our pencils so that we might better know and be with what is acting upon our bodies as a desire for all that is unconditionally loving. Now, I was very cynical when I entered into the world of seminaries and divinity schools 5 years ago, and I still am. But in recent years, I've rebranded. I'm a utopian pessimist. And just a quick story, I remember after a week or so, I first began this journey. I was at a Union Theological Seminary, and I was hanging out with some friends, and my friend asked me, like, so what are you going to do with the Masters of Divinity? We were walking along the streets after a few drinks, and I responded cynically, well, I'll get a PhD. And my friend's like, well, then what will you do? To which I replied, well, I'll educate other people taking on life-altering debt to get their master's degrees, process their religious trauma in the vestigial institutions of liberal Christianity, and have some semblance of a walkable, intentional community for a few years, so they can teach others going through the same process. Having emerged from a really terrible year, having worked a terrible poverty-wage job as I recovered from a mental health crisis, and having spent all of my money to move to New York City to start seminary, I had an understandably bleak outlook about what I've decided to do. At the core of this bleak outlook was a fear of dying in poverty, isolated, and in a shameful social position. For me, there wasn't a lot to initially persuade me otherwise. In many corners of theological education, we're inundated with narratives of decline and scarcity. And this is only exacerbated by this long-held suspicion I have about myself that I have an uncanny ability to show up right when the golden age is over. wrong choice to escape a minimum wage job and bask in the momentary cruel optimism of upper mobility that the academy offers. I was fearful of slipping back into social obscurity and alienation, afraid of death and not living life to its fullest, as defined by those who are apparently living quite fully. But there was something early on that crystallized for me, thankfully. That is, this outcome that I feared, this dying alone, embarrassed, humiliated, and ashamed, was and is the life of many, many people. Every day, thousands of people die in poverty, in isolation, having never received the opportunity to live life in their fullness. And these people are the most beloved and cherished by God. They are who God prefers. Why was I fearful of that? What was I expecting? Who did I think I was? What was keeping me from participating in the world's reality as it is? Why didn't I want to be with those and among those where God's love is the strongest? Lent is about going where God is. And where is God? In the supposed nothingness of sin and death. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. These words are recited as ashes mark our bodies, as we follow Christ's footsteps to the desert, where he is tempted by Satan with the authority of the empires of this world and their bread. Denying the prince of this world, Christ keeps his fast, leaves the desert, and initiates the reign of a kingdom of heaven instead, where all have their daily bread, where all fundamentally belong. From the ashes of palms with which we welcomed Christ as our King, with which we welcomed him to his crucifixion and death, we also welcomed him to his resurrection. We welcomed him to his ascension and glory. From the dust of God's gift of creation, we are given life. And remember that it is to this gift we will return, as if through our sin and our wretchedness, we are reduced in the desert of Lent to merely our bodies, which long for reconciliation and atonement, reduced to these gifts of dirt, bearing the breath of God, where our lives are redeemed from the grave. In the desert, there are at least two paths back to the gifts of our mortal flesh. One, where we are reduced to mere matter through the narratives of death and sin of this so-called world. One where we feel anxious about our next meal. One where we covetously put up treasures in our Roth IRAs to await the day in which our lives are no longer profitable for the princes of this world. One where the only dignified death is achieved only having after amassing property and status and legacy. One where we are imprisoned in our bodies through the strict ideological confines of white supremacy and heteropatriarchy and racial capitalism. One where there are no alternatives and nothing is new, but the repetition of news cycles and trends and more supposedly unprecedented crises. One where our fear of dying shamefully, having not lived in the supposed fullness of the life ways espoused by colonizers and pundits, keep us bound in chains to this wicked and wretched flesh, one where we are mired in shame and guilt and sin, instead of that love which issues freely from ourselves. Or, if there is any hope this Lent, I would like to suggest that we work to disrupt the ideological narratives of death and sin which dominate our ever-growingly age, which define for us our flesh. I suggest that we grasp them by the root as they are burrowed into our bodies as trauma and false idols. Let us adopt practices which return us to this gift we are created from, that returns us to our Creator with all of our beating heart. And here, the prophet Joel is correct. Our return to the Lord will necessarily involve sorrow and grief, because we live in a world defined by empires that both deny death and use death as a concrete and cold abstraction to reign over us. And so we must embrace our dying world and our dying bodies so that we might know each other in and as God's creation. For it is only there that we can begin to know that life conquers death by confessing our forgiveness and love to each other and to God as we would fully to someone we love who is passing away, regardless of faults and trespass and long-held hard feelings. We love that person and know there is no shameful way to die, but there is injustice. We know that there is no sin committed in life which prevents that unconditional and unmerited love which sustains and cares for us. Here, in this forgiving care, we can give our mortal flesh. It is here in this forgiving care that we can give our mortal flesh. We might also know a true Lenten joy, a relief, a balm which Christ in our gospel reading commands us to put on our foreheads, to wash our face in the affirmation of our enfleshed souls in the eyes of a Creator who surpasses all understanding, whose Son became incarnate from the Holy Mother Mary to sanctify all flesh and to reconcile all creation to God's Son. Christ's presence is real and among us in the Eucharist, in the body of the Church, but most importantly, in the dying of this world, with the oppressed and the poor, with those who are reduced to mere matter, with those our death-denying world has forgotten in life, who are denied both life and death. There, Christ's crucified body and blood is most real, and we are called to go there and be witnesses to his resurrection. Lent is a call to the desert, where exodus and liberation are possible, where we might find ourselves under the new heaven and know